Hello and welcome to another Bad Comic Review. This time we are looking at Action Comics 985. This is part 1 of Only Human, written by Rob Williams, art by Gilliam March, Hi-Fi did the colors, Rob lay letters, and editor was Mike Cotton. Now we see Superman doing some general Superman stuff while chatting on the phone with Lois, and he has to go over to the country of Georgia in the Caucasus Mountains to save some locals from these giant direwolf type creatures and people with guns. And it turns out they are being controlled by the machinist, who is using these little chips on people's necks to control them. Superman figures it out without having to murder anyone. He finds the control chip, disables it, and releases everyone. And the locals show him that this is going on in other places too. Same attack, different countries. So he quickly discovers by examining the chip that it was produced by LexCorp, and he flies over to confront Luthor, who is very, smiling but annoyed by Superman. And yeah, the chip was made by Luthor, but he seems to say that the purpose of the chip has been corrupted and somebody's stolen the technology. Luthor suits up in his quasi-Superman outfit, armor thing, and they fly out to find out where this is. Well, it turns out Luthor's got some hidden subroutine that only he can track, and the real machinist is there, and he sends out these little nano bug things to try and control them. Well, Luthor gets hit, and then it's on. Superman is going to have to showdown with him. That's where it ends, but it was a fun first part. I was real interested in what was going on. It's no Dan Jurgens, but it's definitely a well-written issue. I'm not sure who Rob Williams is. I've probably read some of his stuff before, but he seems like a newer writer since I've come back to comics, and I'm intrigued to see where the story goes. I would definitely recommend this, and I thought the art was pretty good for the most part. There are a few issues I take with it, but they're all pretty trivial. It was a solid issue all around. Definitely worth picking up if you see it. I would say it's worth the $3 cover price. I paid, I think, $2.50 for it, so I didn't feel ripped off. So I'm going to recommend this one and say check it out if you haven't already. That's going to do it for me. As always, thank you so much for listening and supporting the channel. If you like the video, hit like and consider subscribing. My Patreon link should be in the description or on the About page, depending on where you're watching this. And as always, we hope to see you on the next episode. Hello and welcome to another Bad Comic Review. This time we are looking at Action Comics 986. This is part 2 of the Only Human storyline. It's just a two-parter, written by Rob Williams, art by Gilliam March, color by Hi-Fi, Rob lay on letters, and group editor was Eddie Berganza. Now we start off with Lex Luthor shooting the crap out of Superman. He's working him over pretty good too, because his suit is based on mother box technology, and the more he's using the suit, the more it kind of corrupts him physically to make him kind of start to look like Darkseid. Superman has to fight him, drags him up into space, and the machinist is very happy with himself, and we get a couple glimpses of people with the Oz tattoos. So Mr. Oz is definitely behind this. Now we don't know much about Mr. Oz yet, but that'll be the next storyline that comes after this issue. So Superman takes him up into space, but Lex manages to hit him with a kryptonite dart, and what Superman said, he really got the point across to him though, a little too late, that Lex believed that only a human could protect humanity, but now he's realizing that this power comes with a cost, and he's not human quite anymore with this kind of power. So he flies down to save Superman, uses everything he's got on the suit, which is all these weird, crazy gadgets, and he's trying to pull up and save Superman and remove that dart out of his chest, and it manages to short circuit the mind tick, is what they call it, the little device on his neck that was controlling him. And thankfully Lex was able to remove it in time, and Superman recovers enough to safely land. Lex is kind of out of it, but that's okay because Superman can take care of it from there, and he takes care of the metallic cats that were being controlled by the machinist. They manage to arrest the machinist and his crew and hand them off to some locals. When Lex gets back to his workspace, he is confronted by Mr. Oz, who wipes a bunch of his information off his computer and then attacks him and cuts the chest plate, the Superman symbol, off of his costume, and basically tell him, you are, and I'm quoting, quoting here, "You are only human and you will only ever be human, and soon you will be gone." And then he leaves, and Lex realizes that he was hit with something very similar to what looks like one of Superman's eye beams. So it's a very interesting conclusion. Definitely leads up to the next storyline where we're going to get a revelation as to who Mr. Oz is. And I thought this was a really good issue. The art's a little sporadic at times, and I think the colors were a little off in a few places, but overall, a good issue. I think everybody did a pretty good job. Pretty happy with this issue. I would definitely recommend this story. It's a two-parter. If you want to jump in, it's a decent spot to jump in and get a complete story for issues 985 and 986, and it's a pretty good one too. And that's gonna do it for this one. As always, thank you so much for listening and supporting the channel. If you liked the video, hit the like button and consider subscribing so you don't miss any future episodes. And hopefully we'll see you on the next one. Hello and welcome to another Bad Comic Review. This time we are looking at Action Comics 987. This is The Oz Effect Part 1 by Dan Jurgens. Writing, Victor Bogdanovich on pencils, Jonathan Clapion, Jay Liston, and Bogdanovich on inks. Color by Mike Spicer, Rob Lay letters. The cover was by Nick Bradshaw and Brad Anderson. I don't really know exactly why it took two people to draw the Superman symbol. This was edited by the group editor Eddie Berganza and editors Mike Cotton and Paul Kaminsky. So what's happening here is we open up with Metallo being killed by Mr. Oz, or apparently killed. It's not 100% on that one. Nobody's ever permanently dead in comics. Then we jump over to Metropolis, where the locals are mad that a cop apparently chased some guy that had hijacked a vehicle full of vaccines. A little bit of F the police. Superman comes in, grabs the vaccines, flies out to some made-up country in Africa that's been involved in like a civil war, and drops it off, then flies off. And Lois and Jonathan meet some guy named Steve Lombard that is some former jock that does something. I don't really care. Mr. Oz is watching things. Apparently he has Doomsday held hostage, and he watches as his agents tempt people into doing bad things. We see the little symbol on their bodies as they're tricking people into doing something evil or encouraging them. So we see an evil boat captain who's driving oil right for the shore because, yeah, okay. And then we've got some rebels that are going to murder some people and steal the vaccines. And then we've got child slavers and some guy that's going to shoot a rare rhino. Well, all of these things start breaking out all over the world, and Superman has to go try and stop them. And then we've got one of the guys is going into wearing a flag bandana because, you know, we got to crap all over patriots, and he's gonna shoot a bunch of illegal immigrants because they took our jobs, and Superman has to come in and save those poor innocent criminals who broke into the country. And he gives us a nice moralizing lecture because that's what Superman does. He's our nanny. And then he tries to stop the oil from spilling more, and he's a little too late because it's already ruined the environment and killed some poor delicious looking seal. He has to stop a prison riot, some like forest fire, and he sees the dead rhino, and then he goes over to this made-up country of Longamba or something where a bunch of people were murdered and some mortars are coming in. He's able to save a few people and destroy the mortars. And that's when Mr. Oz shows up and reveals himself. He teleports Superman and himself to the Fortress of Solitude, pulls his hood down, and we learn who he is. This issue was stupid. The core concept was interesting, but there's a lot of flaws with it. Firstly, all that stuff probably happens on a regular basis anyway. It's not big news. They're focusing on a handful of incidents without larger context saying that there's some sort of sudden uprising. No, they make it sound like there's just like these 5 or 6 things going on. All that stuff happens every day, all day. Turn on the news. So I'm not real down with it. Plus, it was very preachy and moralizing. I expected better of Dan Jurgens, honestly. This is one of the most preachy books I've read of his ever. It did feel a little forced and ham-fisted. I don't know if he was put up to this or if this was his stupid idea, but it was really dumb. So I don't want to be lectured. I want a comic book. I want adventure and excitement, not a grandstanding moral lecture from some guy in his 50s who wants to tell me how to live my life. No, thank you. So I'm going to say this issue's terrible. Hopefully the rest of the storyline gets better. I'm going to read part 2 next, but this issue was crap. And the art was awful. I don't like Bogdanovich's style. I think it's lazy looking and everybody looks deformed. Overall, I would have to say this issue was a complete miss and I'm not going to recommend it. I'm not real interested in reading part 2, honestly. But I'm going to plow through it and hopefully get that video posted today as well. If not, it'll be up tomorrow. But that'll do it for this one. As always, thanks for listening and we hope to see you on the next one. Hello and welcome to another Bad Comic Review. This time we are looking at Action Comics 988. This is the Oz Effect Part 2. Written by Dan Jurgens with art by Ryan Sook. Hi-Fi did the colors, Rob Lay did the letters. Now this issue takes place mostly at the Fortress of Solitude and in flashbacks. Superman is talking to Mr. Oz, who has revealed his real name. Superman doesn't believe him, and they walk around talking a lot, and we figure out that, yeah, Oz has had some kind of influence going on for quite a while in the universe and has been watching Superman, and Superman's not sure how Mr. Oz survived the destruction of Krypton, and we get a very interesting flashback of what happened there and how Mr. Oz was effectively saved, loosely used there, from being killed by some sort of blue energy beaming him out and threw him on Earth in this hellscape African country that I think is supposed to be Somalia, where he was cared for by these people. They were talking about maybe turning him over to a local warlord of some kind, but the mother refuses and they take him home to care for him, and he has a hard time adapting. He's very ungrateful of what they're doing. They took various fragments of kryptonite out of him, but there's still some small pieces in around his eye. The kid sells out the family for hiding this guy, so their own child betrays them. He goes out and even steals some food for them, and they don't really appreciate it. The family does, but the kid doesn't. He rats him out, and they drag everyone out. They find Mr. Oz, and they smack him around a little bit, and the kid is given a gun by the warlord and told to shoot them, and he helps the kid shoot them all. And that's not uncommon with child soldiers. That's actually pretty true to life. But that's when either his powers were allowed to be activated or when he realized what he could do, and he uses his good eye to use heat vision to kill them, and he confronts the kid and says why, and the kid opens fire on him, and then he is beamed out by the same mysterious blue light, and then he is subjected to watching all these TV screens of the atrocities of man, from nuclear war to the Crusades and the Nazis and all these other horrible things. So he's convinced that Earth does not deserve Superman, and he wants to take him away to another place because the fate of the Earth is sealed and Earth is going to be destroyed soon by some incredibly powerful force, which is the force that took Mr. Oz and saved him from the destruction of Krypton. Now, we do have a few leads as to where this is leading because, this issue is several months old now. They're going to hint at it a little more, I think, in the next issue, but the big crossover event is coming, and it's pretty obvious that there's some things in flux here. But overall, this was a pretty good issue. I liked it a lot better than last issue. The moralizing wasn't heavy-handed and forced. Overall, this was a much better issue than the previous one, and I'm a lot happier with the storyline. The art's cleaned up, too. It's a lot better. I'm not a fan of Bogdanovich's style. This guy is a lot better. I think Sook has a lot more natural talent for it. It needed more detailing in a lot of scenes, so it looked like they were kind of cutting corners a few times, but other times it looked great. Like the scenes with the family that he was living with were pretty well detailed overall, but there are other times where they got lazy with the faces and features of the characters, which has become very common for some reason, and I don't like it. Plus, I hate the lenticular covers. They're kind of cool from a gimmick standpoint, but it's just like the foil embossing of the 90s. It's just an attempt to get you to spend more money. I wouldn't pay cover price for it, absolutely not, but it was a pretty good story overall. So if you get a chance to pick it up, this was definitely a much better issue than the previous one, and I would recommend this one. That'll do it for me. As always, thanks for listening, and we hope to see you on the next one. Hello and welcome to another Bad Comic Review. This time we are looking at Action Comics 989. This is part 3 of the Oz Effect, part of DC's Rebirth stories. And this was written by Dan Jurgens. He also did art breakdowns. And Victor Bogdanovich did pencils. And the inks were by Bogdanovich and Trevor Scott. Color by Mike Spicer. Rob Lay did letters. I thought the colors were pretty good, actually. Very good shading techniques on a lot of these. But the art is garbage. I don't like Victor Bogdanovich's art. I think it's very lazy looking, and it continues quite frequently throughout this issue. At least he could draw the female form fairly decently, but the faces are all messy and very, 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 very manga style, and not in a good way in all the worst aspects. So Lois Lane is at the Daily Planet with Jonathan, talking to Perry White and Jimmy Olsen, when a mad bomber comes in, inspired by an Oz associate. Superman is still at the Fortress of Solitude, talking with Mr. Oz, and Oz is showing him all these tragedies that are going on, and they're all the same ones from last issue. They're just slightly escalated now. So Superman flies into action after a little bit of a brief conversation. He doesn't know about the gunman at the Daily Planet, who's got the suicide vest, and Steve Lombard tries to jump into action but quickly gets shot. Lois Lane says, "I'm a reporter, you can trust me. There's no fake news here," and he falls for that for some reason. Meanwhile, in that made-up African country that's in the Civil War, they decide to launch chemical weapons, butcher their people thanks to the inspiration of an Oz agent. Superman disables the mortars and the gas, but it causes retaliation from the other side, escalating that civil conflict even further. Meanwhile, the gunman at the Daily Planet activates his vest and somebody flies through to save Lois, but it's not Superman. It's actually a pretty interesting aspect to the story. Superboy flies into action and does nothing. He's like, "I'm putting on my costume," and he flies up to the Daily Planet's roof and just kind of stands there for a little while. So there's a conversation between Oz and Lois Lane, and then Oz goes up to the roof and talks to Jonathan. Jonathan is teleported to the Fortress of Solitude, while one of Mr. Oz's minions starts up some sort of machine, and Oz talks to Jonathan about this magical place where he wants to take everyone, a place called Bliss, and the issue ends right there. Now overall, this was kind of a middle story. It was a little bit meandering. It's a lenticular cover one, so at a $4 cover price, I don't think it was worth that. A lot happens in the issue, and elements of it were really good, but it was definitely a weak issue. This whole thing with all these things going on at once, a lot of it feels very heavy-handed, moralizing, just like part 1. It's not as bad, but it could have been a better issue if they would tone that political crap down a little bit and just show a lot of chaos going on that Superman's got to deal with. Focus a little more on that without all the grandstanding and moralizing. So overall, it was an okay issue. It was worth like $1, $1.50. I don't think I'd pay more than $2 for it. If I did, I'd feel pretty ripped off. So overall, I would recommend it if you find it cheap. Don't pay cover price or anywhere near that for it. It's not worth it. Overall, an okay element to the story, but it's not all that memorable. It was a decent addition, just not a necessary one. And if you pick up this issue independently, it's not going to make any sense. So that'll do it for this one. As always, thank you so much for listening and supporting the channel. Be sure and hit like and consider subscribing so you don't miss a single episode. And we'll be seeing you. Hello and welcome to another Bad Comic Review. This time we're looking at Action Comics 990. This is the Oz Effect Part 4. Superman is dealing with the poison gas that was dropped by the rebels. He is not happy about it, so he scoops up the leaders of both sides, takes them out to the middle of nowhere, and starts telling them that they're going to resolve their differences right now because the killing is going to stop. Meanwhile, Lois and Perry White and Jimmy Olsen are looking for Jonathan. She gets Jimmy's watch to signal for Superman, while Mr. Oz is showing Jonathan around the Fortress of Solitude and telling him we have to leave the Earth. You could go to this place called Bliss. It's this beautiful magic land of fairies and elves where everybody gets to be who they are and not hide anything, and there's no secret identities. Meanwhile, Superman is burning a bunch of vehicles and weapons to try and make these two sides talk, which really, I don't think that'd really do anything. So while he's gone, he flies off to because he hears the watch going off, and we see some of Mr. Oz's minions starting up this machine, but Superman intervenes, destroys the machine, and makes it so it's pretty much inoperable, and then he heads out for the alarm. And on the roof there of the Daily Planet, while he's talking to Lois, saying they can't find their kid, Mr. Oz shows up with Jonathan, and Jonathan's like, "We need to leave the Earth, it's all gonna die." So Superman is about to hit Mr. Oz, but the kid gets in the way, and we're left with a cliffhanger ending. Overall, it was another grandstanding moralizing issue, which is really disappointing. The concept of the arc is pretty good, but there's this like weird attitude that if you just sit down and talk with sociopathic murderers, that everything will be worked out. Negotiation. It doesn't always work that way. I don't understand why they think that's going to resolve the situation. It's never worked before. I understand that sometimes you can have political agreements and truces and things like that, but it's a very utopian idea that you could just snatch the leaders up and make them work it out, and everybody else will just fall in line. Oh, you got soft, okay, and then the second command kills the leader, and then they're taken over, and the whole thing goes back down that spiral. And destroying all the weapons just means they're gonna buy more. The storyline with the Oz minions and their machine was pretty interesting. That was kind of cool, but overall, it was kind of a waste of an issue. It was okay if you get it for like $1. If you paid more than $1 for it, you're probably feeling a little cheated, unless your worldview aligns with the politics of the story. I'm really disappointed with Dan Jurgens on this storyline, and I'm only finishing it because it gets me to the next storyline so that I could get closer to the Bendis material that's coming out. I want to get caught up. Otherwise, I won't even bother finishing this story arc. It's very boring and moralizing, and I expect better from Dan Jurgens. Just write a good adventure story without getting on your political soapbox. Is that really so hard to do? You'll probably find it in a quarter bin, honestly, but if you find it for $1 or less, pick it up if you're going to read the whole thing. If you read it as an individual issue, it doesn't do a lot of good. I don't think you really get caught up to speed as to what's going on. So aside from that, I won't bother reading it if you're not going to read the whole storyline. But that's just my opinion. As always, thank you so much for listening and supporting the channel. Be sure and hit like if you enjoyed the video, and consider subscribing so you never miss an episode, and we hope to see you on the next one. Hello and welcome to another Bad Comic Review. This time we are looking at Action Comics 991. This is part 5 of the Oz Effect. It is the final chapter. Now Superman and Mr. Oz are getting into it on the top of the Daily Planet, and he is sick of Mr. Oz's interference, and despite Jonathan pleading with him, they decide to have it out. They end up in some like pocket universe kind of thing, which is a replica of the actual place where Mr. Oz was being held, and him and Superman go at it pretty heavily. It turns out Mr. Mxyzptlk was being held there too in a story called Superman Reborn, and he finds out Doomsday's being held there as well. He also learns that the bad eye that Mr. Oz has doesn't shoot heat vision, it shoots kryptonite. So he gets blasted with that. Superman is obviously at least equally matched, if not outgunned entirely, and Oz says, "I can save you if you let me," and Superman says, "But who's going to save me from you?" And he manages to get the staff that Oz has and breaks it, which also breaks control over him that this mysterious other person had. And I think if you've been reading Doomsday Clock, you might have an idea of who that is. But the fact that the staff is broken means that not only is the control broken, but the kryptonite that's lodged in his skull is also going to kill him now. That staff was what was preventing it from injuring him further. But Mr. Oz realizes that what he's done was wrong, and that he in fact is not the person that he was thinking he was while he was on Earth. It was all the influence of this other person. Then there is some dialogue with Superman talking to someone and a flash of blue light, and he finds himself in the Fortress of Solitude. And he has to explain what's going on to Lois and Jonathan before going back to work, inspiring hope in people. This was actually a good issue. This is written by Dan Jurgens, who did the story and breakdowns. Victor Bogdanovich is still on pencil. pencils. I don't know why, it's awful. Bogdanovich, Trevor Scott, and Scott Hanna did inks. Mike Spencer on color. Rob Lay on letters. And the editor was Paul Kaminsky and Mike Cotton were the editors. And this was definitely a significantly better issue than most of the previous ones. It actually wraps everything up pretty nicely and really brings the storyline together a lot better with a lot less of the heavy-handed moral nonsense that was being forced down our throats in previous issues. So I like this one a lot better. I would definitely recommend this, especially if you can find it cheap. I don't think this storyline's worth much right now, so you could probably find it for $2 or $3. For $2, it's definitely worth it. Anything above that, I would say, is probably overpriced because most of the story was not very good. But the last issue was definitely probably the best part of the story. I still hate Bogdanovich's art style. I think it's lazy and it just looks rushed. So like I said, I'll recommend it, but that is about as far as I can go with it. It's not a strong recommendation. It's just, if you're gonna read the storyline, obviously you'll want the last issue, but I would just read the first and last issue and you'll get kind of an idea. Maybe the second part, the first part, second part, and final part, and you'll have a good idea what's going on. That's just my opinion, and that'll do it for me. As always, thank you so much for listening and supporting the channel. If you liked the video, please hit the like button and consider subscribing so you don't miss any future episodes, and we hope to see you on the next one. Hello and welcome to another Bad Comic Review. This time we are looking at Action Comics 992. This is a follow-up, sort of an epilogue to the Oz Effect storyline. Superman is trying to figure out if Mr. Oz is who he said he was, and he is not liking what he's finding. He gets very upset when Kellex tells him that Mr. Oz is who he claimed he was. And Batman shows up to kind of talk to him. He can kind of relate to what's going on. There's a brief reference to Batman when him and Flash had a little adventure called The Button, in which Batman found the comedian's button embedded in the Batcave wall, and the story that kind of ensued from there. And this all seems to be tied into what's going to be going on in Doomsday Clock. So Superman's a little confused and really just kind of needs some more information. So Green Lantern Hal Jordan shows up, and they go to Mogo, which is currently the headquarters of the Green Lantern Corps, and they search the Lantern Corps' database to see what's going on. And it turns out there is a recording of Krypton exploding, but something has corrupted part of the file. They do even have his rocket flying out of the planet, but then it gets kind of fuzzy and then it's already exploded. Well, that doesn't really set his mind at ease. He thinks that somebody's been tampering with time, and he's not wrong, but he's also not 100% correct. He decides to take things into his own hands, and he goes up to the JLA watchtower and finds the cosmic treadmill and uses it to go back in time. Unfortunately, this is probably a bad idea because Booster Gold shows up a second too late to warn him not to do it. So we're going to get a really cool crossover storyline from Superman and Booster Gold coming up. Hopefully it's cool anyway. Now, the art in this issue was vastly superior to the previous storylines. Pretty impressively done. I was real happy with it. Green Lantern looked really cool, especially. Not Ethan Van Sciver cool, but pretty cool nonetheless. Most of the scenes were really good. We got a lot of dynamic shots from different angles, which was really cool to see. The story was written by Dan Jurgens, but the script was by Rob Williams. Will Conrad did the art, and Hi-Fi did color. Rob Lay did letters. Paul Kaminsky was the editor. Eddie Berganza did the group editing. Like I said, I really liked what Will Conrad was doing here. I thought the art was pretty solid, and I'd like to see more of this guy's work. Overall, very, very good. So, very impressive issue. Great standalone storyline that kind of wraps up a little bit of what happened in the Oz Effect, which was a much weaker story in my opinion. So that's just my take on it. This is a definite pickup if you're reading Superman. I think they tied a lot in, especially to Doomsday Clock. I think this is all kind of going in that direction, and they're spending a lot of time building up to that. So if you've been reading Doomsday Clock, you'll probably want to pick this one up to complete your story arc. And if you picked up the Oz Effect, you'll definitely want this. It's a great epilogue that leads into the next storyline. But that'll do it for me. As always, thanks for listening and supporting the channel. If you liked the video, hit the thumbs up and consider subscribing so you don't miss any future episodes. And hopefully we'll see you on the next one.